mind does not operate along European paradigm of structure. So if you're teaching him one way, he's going to automatically fail. If the system is structured for him to fail, of course he's going to fail. He's going to say, see, I told you. That's ridiculous. We know that genius is definitely and always has been in the African mind, because everywhere you go on the planet, you see African genius once left to its own accord. But when manipulated, you could turn him, or that genius in her, into something that is demonic. Back in 1964, they created a whole other way of teaching your son. It was called outcome-based education. It wasn't about you learning math and knowing what math was. 1 and 1 equals 2. 2 was the answer. If you got 3, you were wrong. But today, if 1 and 1 and you said 3, you said, oh, you tried. It's all right. We'll pass you on. That's all right. You did your best. See, so what they did was, in outcome-based education, it became more feminized. It became more of a communal participation in the act or idea of learning, not learning. If you could come together and participate in group things, that showed that you had the ability to be passed on into the new society. If you were a rogue and you jumped out and said, no, I ain't going for this, which is where all the gangs started coming from, because most of the males could not deal in an education system that was like this. And this is why you see most of the females getting the PhDs today, because the system was structured in such a way that took away the challenge that men needed.
And it was through the IQ test, which is the #1 weapon of special education, which is the #1 weapon of special education. They continue to overdiagnose and misdiagnose black children as being mentally retarded who are not. I had a case in Philadelphia this past summer right here. Some white lawyers asked me to come in and participate in the case. Black boy, 8th grade, diagnosed as mentally retarded. I evaluated the brother, found out he was never mentally retarded. But when I looked into the previous IQ tests that were given, they misinterpreted the data. So this young man been walking around with a diagnosis of mental retardation since he was in 8th grade. He's now a young adult. And although he's been told by me and his parents that you are not retarded and you were never retarded, the self-esteem, the self-concept, the self-image is so crushed. This brother probably going to need therapy for the next 20 years because he bought into what? A superficial label that white society has given them. The gifted movement really started to take form right after the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. The Supreme Court said you could no longer use race as a factor to segregate groups. But they didn't say you couldn't use disability or ability. So the white folks said, guess what? We're going to come up with a gifted program. We're going to segregate the white kids from the black kids after Brown versus Board, because we're going to say the white kids are too smart. It's not based on skin. It's based on ability. Problem with that, it didn't work too well because a lot of white kids didn't score high on the IQ test. So they said, guess what? This is working for some white kids, but it ain't working for all. So guess what? In 1963, the same year that the Civil Rights Bill was introduced, a Chicago psychologist created the learning disability. The learning disability. And it is through the IQ test and the learning disability that so many of our children are marshaled into special ed kids where they'll probably never learn to read on grade level by the time they graduate.
DC, it's like if I